Welcome back. The area being fought over is South Ossetia. It's a relatively small territory of around 2,300 square kilometres, 100 kilometres north of the Georgian capital, Tbilisi. This latest fighting is not the first the region has seen since the fall of the Soviet Union. Hundreds died in violent clashes between 1991 and 92 as South Ossetia attempted to separate from Georgia. Following a peace agreement a year later, the province elected its first president. The country had already drafted its own constitution and declared independence, although this has never been internationally recognised. In 2002, South Ossetia's president, Eduard Kokoiti, asked Moscow to recognise the territory's independence and absorb it into Russia. In a 2006 referendum, South Ossetians voted in favour of the split. Georgia then approved a temporary administration for the province. In March this year, South Ossetia called on the rest of the world to recognise it, following the West's support for Kosovo's break from Serbia. And in April, the region rejected a power-sharing deal with Georgia, insisting on full independence. Well, still with us are our guests. In Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, in Paris, Nino Katadze, and in Washington, D.C., Richard Weiss. Nino Katadze, if I could ask you, do you think this is, in part, all about what happened over Kosovo? That this has sort of sparked this
of course. No, I think this accelerated the whole thing because I was filming in Russia at that time, and it was said openly by Russian politicians that if the West was to recognize Kosovo's independence, next would be Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And they were absolutely openly talking about backing up these regions in the Georgian territory. So it's just the second part of the story. And I have to say that for 10 years already, Russia has been distributing Russian passports to this in these regions, and now it's a pretext to protect Russian citizens. So it's not a new story. It has been going like that for years now, since the Soviet Union stopped to exist. And for me, it's all about keeping the influence in the Caucasus.
But Pavel Felgenhauer, would you agree with that? It's simply Moscow trying to reassert old influence in an area which it feels it ought to control?
Well, with that I would agree, of course, but I would very much disagree that Kosovo had any influence on the situation there. None whatsoever. Russian policies were set before that, and actually the real Russian policy is not to recognize these small and impoverished and scarcely populated republics, especially Ossetia, which is really no asset to anyone. The idea was to keep Georgia in Russia's fold, and we were all the time offering Tbilisi the deal that you stay with us, and then the situation will continue. I mean, we organize some kind of confederacy, and legally you'll keep these regions, though we'll, of course, keep them a bit away as a guarantee that you won't go west.
Okay. Richard Weiss, let me bring you in.
Kosovo has nothing to do with this at all.
Okay. Richard Weiss, on that last point, can I bring you in on the idea of it sort of trying to kind of keep their sphere of influence and affect how Georgia looks out on the world? What do you think of that idea? Is it not really about South Ossetia or Abkhazia anymore? It's more about Georgia, is it?
I think that is correct in the sense that I don't think Kosovo had much to change because Russia did not immediately change its policies after Kosovo's declaration of independence. Russian leaders had sometimes said, well, this is going to be a Pandora's box. If you allow Kosovo independent, well, then maybe we'll recognize Abkhazia or South Ossetia. But that was always backed away from. It was never made official policy for good reason, because it raises questions about Chechnya. It raises a whole bunch of awkward questions. I think, yes, I think that was the basic idea. I don't know if Russia would have consummated the deal, but the idea was you keep Abkhazia and South Ossetia outside of Tbilisi's control and use that as a mechanism of leverage to try and influence Georgia's policies. And that was not working. The Georgian government was still trying to move closer to NATO in any case.
Okay, Nino Katadze, I mean, you know Georgia very well. If Georgia is defeated effectively in this particular war, as everyone seems to be calling it, what's next? Is it the end for Saakashvili?
Well, I think that will be one of the aim that Russia is sort of looking for, because he is irritating Russia a lot with his policy. On another hand, this will be a total tragedy for this small country, because, I mean, you know what does it mean having these bombings all over the country. Nothing to do now with the South Ossetia. It's in Gori, near Tbilisi, the airport has been bombed, Poti has been bombed, Senaki has been bombed. So we don't know at all where it's going to stop. And of course, to bring back stability and make people make sure that people can live there, it will be very, very difficult. Okay. And I don't know how Georgia can handle that.
Can I go back to Moscow now? Pavel Helgenhauer, do you think how much impact do you think there's going to be on energy security? I mean, after all, it's one of the only areas that in the Caspian area that is getting oil and gas out without the Kremlin influence. Presumably, that's a matter of concern for countries outside the Russian sphere.
Well, sure, of course, this war is disrupting oil supplies. The Azeris have already said that they'll stop pumping oil to the Black Sea port of Poti. This is going to disrupt it, and the war is going to continue. I mean, don't think that Georgia has been beaten. The Georgian military and right now already the Russian military, the Russian General Staff says that they are very, very strong and very fine. That's what happened in these several days, that they understood that they're fighting a very formidable enemy, and that Georgian military have not been defeated whatsoever. So the conflict is going to continue, and its outcome is right now unpredictable. And I believe it can cause much worse things than just simply oil not going to Poti. It can cause a major rift between Russia and the West. Because as the conflict develops and escalates, which will most likely will happen, the West will inevitably have to side against Russia.
Okay, on that point, Richard Weitz, what do you think? Is it a major rift developing, do you think, between the West and Russia?
I wish it were so, but I don't think so. I think the Russian leadership calculated correctly that the relationship was poor enough already, and on the one hand, the other hand, NATO, not even Washington was willing to go to war with Russia to defend Georgia. The most there would be is diplomatic protests, as we've seen. So I think the Russians pretty much have a free hand to do what they plan to in Georgia and not suffer major consequences, and at least from the West.
Is that because Russia views the West's power simply on the wane? I mean, are they doing it because they can?
Well, it's a combination of the West has sort of lost both carrots and sticks in the case of Russia. We can't. The relationship has been poor enough that Russia can't really hope to gain much. I mean, we've decided to deploy the missile defenses in Eastern Europe despite their objections. There's a concern about reviving the American military and doing other steps regardless of what Russia's view is. So there really wasn't much the benefit Russia could see immediately from working closely with the West. On the other hand, there are no real penalties either, because the West is sort of ignoring Russia and trying to pursue its more important security goals, and so they weren't really going to suffer, I don't think, any major consequences. I don't think anyone in Washington is prepared to go to war with Russia over Georgia.
Okay, Nino.
So I think they just lack of tools on our part at the moment.
Okay, Nino Kitadze, do you think that Georgia is prepared to keep on fighting, or do you think it's going to try to come up with some sort of a face-saving arrangement and a solution to this?
Well, you know, they already asked for peace talks many times, and I don't think that, you know, Georgia is barely 5 million people, and Russia is 150 million people. How possibly somebody can win this war? You know, if it's war between Georgia and Russia, it's just total disaster. I mean, Georgia would just cease to exist one fine day, and very soon if it continues like that. For me, it's absolutely clear whether Georgian military was trained by Americans or not. It won't make such a decisive point. I don't think so. And I think it's going to be a total disaster if it goes on like that, because you know, it just happened that I was a foreign correspondent working in Chechnya when it started, that nobody could say that at that time it will end like it did end. So, you know, it very much reminds me the beginning of First Chechen War, what's going on now. And I don't know what sort of justification Russian military might have to bomb the whole Georgia like that.
Okay.
For me, it's just beyond understanding.
OK, on that note, we have to leave it there. I'm afraid we've run out of time. But thank all our guests. In Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer. In Paris, Nino Katadze. And in Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz. Thank you very much indeed, all three of you, for your time. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We always welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us. The address is insidestory@aljazeera.net. And that's it. See you next time. Bye for now.